Oh, looks like Nick just disappeared.
And Nick said, "See ya."
Oh, looks like Nick just disappeared.
And Nick said, "See ya."
Nick was not ready to go live. We'll miss him.
All right. Well, we
And Nick
are
said, "See
officially
ya."
live and
Nick
on the
was not
internet.
ready to go live. We'll miss him.
We are getting some
All right.
echo, I
Well,
think,
we
from
are
someone.
officially
Live and
Nick
on the
was not
internet.
ready to go live. We'll miss him.
We are getting some echo, I think, from
I
someone.
don't hear any.
Nick was not ready to go live. We'll miss him.
Oh, that would be me. I had the Twitch channel up apparently on my computer. Forgot to close that as I was getting everything ready. Um, we're gonna figure it all out. We'll figure it all
Right. Growing
out.
pains.
uh, Also, James will be joining us here in a little bit. So for everyone, hi again, hi everyone.
Hello.
Uh, we're at Andromeda Adventures, and now you guys finally get the chance to meet Kyle, sir, not appearing in the last film. Uh, Hi, Kyle. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Yeah. My name is Kyle. Last name Broadway. I also live up to that name because I know how to put on a show. Um, yeah, I'm 21 years old. Recently just turned 21.
Happy
I
birthday.
currently, thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
Feels good. Um, yeah, I been going to college for associates in biology. Decided that's not for me. Uh, Going into the military, the Air Force in December, and then I just work as a flagger. And I like games, board games. That's about it. And then I got a bird. This is my literally my pride and my joy. Her name is Daisy.
Hi,
She's like
Daisy.
I don't know how old you guys are, but she's like might be older than you guys. She's like 30 years old. She's a yellow
Jesus.
crested cockatoo. I got her from my grandmother. Um, yeah, she says
I'm not going to
hello
answer that question.
and then she cat calls. So
She cat calls.
yeah, and then also she does pluck, but she was rescued from like an abusive place,
Oh.
so that's very
Well,
sad.
now whatever you play, you have to have a familiar.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Hey, I will have a cat if you have a bird. That's the deal.
All right, so hi everyone. Welcome to Geeking Out. This is going to be one of our occasional, when we can, streams where we just kind of have a roundtable discussion. As more viewers pop in, if we get more viewers, we'll be answering any questions that you guys have, letting you guys kind of jump into the chat, say anything you like, chime in on the topic, or ask any of us uh, any of the questions. You've got Evan.
Hello.
Great to see you again. Have you coming
Yes, you
back.
too.
He'll be playing Garth. We've got Nick, who will be playing Hadrian, and we just introduced Kyle. And then, of course, there's me, Frosty, uh, the host of Andromeda Adventures. One of the hosts, I guess, for this thing. We're all kind of hosting, right? Yeah, we're all
Yeah.
hosts here. Yeah,
Yeah. We're
yeah.
all hosts.
Yes, Andromeda Adventures, where everything's made up and the points don't matter. Wait, wrong show. Yeah. So, for tonight, we decided we were going to start out our conversation with talking about getting into character, developing our characters, how you construct a character and kind of bring them to life, find their voice, pick their class, finding their abilities, and what sort of inspires you and drives you to create the characters that you create, and ways that we can build into our characters and their abilities through class, background, whatever game. We'll mostly be talking about Dungeons and Dragons, but I think a lot of this advice will be sort of system agnostic, uh, and how we, you know, geeks kind of go about doing that and try and especially create characters that we will enjoy playing for the long term as something that a lot of players haven't gotten to experience um, as they're getting into D&D and are new to things is more long form storytelling, where it's not just an adventure or the occasional adventure here and there or a few sessions, but having the opportunity to really dive into their character and making a character that's going to last and grow and develop. And I think another good thing for us to talk about tonight is how we handle changes that happen to our characters as we play, and growing with the challenges and setbacks that they experience. Uh, with that, I guess we'll start the first question, which is, I think, best place to start is kind of where do you find inspiration for your characters? How do you get inspired for a new character that you are going to feel attached to? And I think since they're the new one here and the birthday boy, we're going to start with Kyle.
Yeah, very good question. So one of my most recent characters I made was for Nick's campaign, and he's an aberrant mind sorcerer. And one of the things that I recently did was I read The Call of Cthulhu by Lovecraft, and it was really cool and stuff like that. So a lot of inspiration stuff that I find for characters is from what I read, and I really like the ideas and the themes from it. So the idea of like cosmic horror as a genre, and then also global wide conspiracy, and yeah. So I went and I took that, and that's a character I made. I kind of looked at D&D. I'm like, what kind of classes and stuff like that match these themes and these ideas that I want to explore? And Aberrant Mind Sorcerer is literally just right up the alley. And yeah, so that's what I chose. And then Nick really went hand in hand with that. So he decided to progress and develop that character through dreams and nightmares, which is also very Lovecraftian. Yeah, and it's just really cool to explore these. And it's also something that doesn't really translate too well to D&D, because like cosmic horror is kind of like just making you feel just useless, and just it's inevitable. You're gonna lose no matter what.
The insurmountable force of nature.
Yeah, like was it nihilism? I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, nihilism.
But then Nick did a very good job of translating that, so it's just like it's like this insurmountable cosmic force, but like maybe there's something to be done about it.
Well, and I think that brings up a good topic for us to kind of circle around to later, which is insane characters or characters that struggle with madness.
Never played one of those.
What's it like?
But
no spoilers. I'm sorry, I can't talk about it.
Evan, why don't you take it away for the question next?
What I found,
do you find inspiration?
I found inspiration in the characters I make by putting a piece of myself into the character. So having the same kind of similar flaws that I see in myself into a character can help me get invested in the character, to really want to keep playing them over a long-term campaign. Also having the strength to see myself in the character as well. So kind of taking the good with the bad I see in myself and kind of putting it into my characters is where they gets me going into a character.
All right. I want to touch on that actually, and this is for everybody. But how do you, other than just putting yourself, right, throwing yourself into D&D, how do you take, because I've heard a lot of players bring up, they take a portion or put some aspect of themselves. And I think us sort of semi-actor, performer, character, role player types do tend to put some of us in. And I think it was Michael Caine once said, if they're going to cast you for a part, they want you for that part, so it's always going to be a reflection of you. But how do you find that part of yourself that you're looking to explore, or is it kind of random? What's that process like?
It's mainly how I'm feeling when I create the character, what has been happening in my life recently, things like that. Just the current mood I'm in can influence the character pretty heavily.
Just kind of holding up a mirror.
Yeah, looking at my life and kind of taking a step back and looking what is going on in my life, what's going good, what's going bad, taking kind of aspects from both and putting into a character.
All right. And Nick, over to you.
So, like Evan, I try and put some aspect of myself into a character. There are some pieces of myself that I find are almost always in characters, sort of the bits of my mind that are difficult for me to separate. Things like the characters I play tend to be a little sarcastic. They tend to be a little flippant. That's more a reflection of the kind of humor that I have, and it is. I can separate myself from it, but I do find that to be the kinds of characters that I enjoy playing in a long form campaign, some piece of that is usually there. But then, like Evan, sort of examining and magnifying my own flaws or virtues is the other thing that I do. Again, no spoilers to be found, but like the character I'll be playing for this campaign is very much a reflection of, at least at the start, what I see as kind of like my internalized misanthropy and difficulty with people, uh, combined with a bit of, I guess, brutal honesty towards myself and others. And that's something I've struggled with for a very long time, is having that and acknowledging it and knowing that, like, it's not necessarily. I think the most interesting aspects that I find, at least, to explore in a character are the ones that aren't just like, this is a flaw, this is a problem, or this is a good thing, right? Because, like, with that, the way I look at it is, it's not necessarily wrong, but it's a problem sometimes. And struggling to find the happy medium is a thing that, like, I still haven't done. So I heard a friend once say that D&D is basically like uh, the best D&D is you exploring your own emotional trauma through the lens of a fantasy character, and like that's
Yeah.
I
but
think
that's
I
what
can definitely relate to that.
that
Yeah.
for me is what it is, and what makes a good long-term character is somebody who I can relate to enough and find myself in enough that, like, whatever the situations that come their way, I feel like my reactions to those situations are reflective of the character, because they are reflective of a certain part of me, not all of me. And obviously, like, there's a bit of suspension of disbelief there. Like, my solution to a problem is never going to be cutting its head off, because I don't have the training or the tools. But like,
Or,
yeah.
proclivity or freedom to.
Well,
Right.
well.
Okay, we might all have that proclivity
Yeah.
for this sometimes. We
Yeah.
did just get another viewer. Hi, welcome. Uh, as we're talking and geeking out, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in and post it to the chat, and we'll bring it up to our wonderful panel of players and GM. Um, I don't often get to play, but I do want to respond to that. For me, I often find inspiration in either the story that I want to explore, sort of briefly conceptually, or through art or some other media, such as what Kyle said with books or ideas. Um, Whether it's an NPC or a character that I'm developing, I find if I can get a hold of some aspect of that character, just sort of an initial grasp, from there I can start to kind of flesh it out and put together, okay, if they've got this story, why is it like that? Or, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, if you grab art online or look around or have your friend draw a picture, you can look at that and be like, okay, there's a whole story about this person in the picture. What what is that story? And then kind of flesh it out from there. And I find for me, just I put as much of myself into the characters, just like you were saying, it's sort of that mirror we hold up as we were kind of talking about. And I think that the parts of me that end up in the character are reflective of like what I'm seeing in the story that I'm kind of putting together. Um, at least that's how I go about it. But where do you think you? I'm kind of curious for you guys. Is there a part of yourself that is in every character that you play, or something that you've found, an aspect of yourself that you seem to play maybe better or worse than other aspects of yourself, that like a part of yourself that you bring into a character that just doesn't tend to play well, whether it's a good or bad quality or I don't think, as Nick said, I think there's a great expression. Sorry to kind of round about this for mental health, but that the coping mechanisms we develop are not bad. They kept us alive and got us through everything that we went through. They're just no longer functional coping mechanisms in whatever environment we're in that they're being disruptive to. And that's something to remember. We don't really have necessarily bad qualities or bad people, but we're, when it comes to mental health, we might have useful adaptations that are more detrimental to us in our modern or current setting. Um, Sorry to go off on a little tangent there.
No, it's all good.
But yeah, aspects, things that we all do that, or parts of yourself that you put into a character that you found either come through in every character you play or that are really strong. Anything you guys have noticed that I've done in a lot of my NPCs, for those of you that have played with me, where do we want to? I think talking about, I think we're on a good subject here.
Yeah. Yeah, I put like a piece of myself in every character I play. It's something that helps me get more involved in the character, especially in long form campaigns, to have that investment, and almost helps me almost work on myself as well, kind of work through the stuff that I'm going through at the time, um, exploring it not just by myself through a different lens of a character going through the same thing can actually really help me kind of figure stuff out.
Uh, Evan,
Yeah,
I'm actually curious because I think,
Mhm.
and this is a question for I think all of you, um, but you've mentioned that you were a newer player,
Mhm.
um, had your first game in December, I believe.
Yep.
And when you came onto Andromeda Adventures, you were still pretty new and it was a long form campaign, but there were people, you didn't know anybody at the table.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of us are used to playing with friends where the weight of exposing these parts of yourself to others could be lessened
Yeah.
or heightened, right, depending on your friend group.
Mhm.
Um, but I think there is a added stressor coming in and kind of putting your so much of yourself into a character in front of complete strangers
Right.
when you're playing online or with a new group or going out, at your local game store. So for all of you, what ways, how does that play out for you in kind of comfort and finding yourself at the table and bringing your character to that table in a particular way?
I'll jump in just quickly and say this gets to a topic that I think we should also discuss is sort of how to not shy away from moments that are emotionally difficult
Mhm.
for a character or for yourself. But I want to let Evan answer the question because it was directed at him. I just wanted to
Um,
put that on the table.
As he like
I
slides back.
um, I found it's easier almost when you don't know anybody to kind of put
Mm,
yourself out there. At least in my opinion. Because my friends I'm really close with, we know everything about each other. So there's almost no surprises. And the people at the table, no one, I guess no one, it's almost like a fresh slate, getting to know new people. And part of getting to know people, in my opinion, is seeing their good and their bad, their flaws and their strengths. Um, just it's like I said, a little bit easier in my opinion, especially because it's not face to face. It's you don't know who's behind the voice you're talking to. So I mean, it's almost like talking to a therapist online. Just kind of putting yourself out there.
awesome.
Yeah.
Kyle, your thoughts.
Yeah. So in terms of putting myself into characters, I noticed that I tend to shy away from like Lone Ranger, kind of edgy characters. And most of my characters are very sociable. And that's just because of who I am, as a person, and then also just because it's really good for D&D and like role play and stuff like that. That a character interacts with everybody and doesn't just stick to themselves. Um, terms of like trauma and experiences and flaws, stuff like that. I mean, at the end of the day, parts of ourselves are always going to come into the characters, and I think beyond the sociable part, probably a lot of what comes into all these characters are I'm not like really aware of. It might just be subconscious. So I'd actually be very interested to see what people pick up on throughout all my characters, and what I'm putting into them versus not, because I'm not picking up on them. But yeah.
Well, and that'll be a topic that I think we'll cover here in a little bit, when characters kind of take on a life of their own. But Nick, your response.
Yeah, so in terms of what aspects of myself that are in a character that I think are always there, whether they're problematic or not, sociability, like Kyle said. Even when I am playing characters who are, by all appearances or background or description, like quite dark and should be an edgelord, as the term is, they are quite talkative. They're very open and expressive about the fact that they hate everybody, but they engage. Um, that's partly just a D&D thing. It's partly me. I do think that like bad tendencies that I probably put into some characters, which are coping mechanisms, are things like deflection, are things like the utilization of humor at moments when things are very, very dark. And I find that, again, like that can be a problem, but I think as long as it's done honestly and not like out of left field or in a way that like makes reference to too much pop culture or too much things that like the character wouldn't actually know about, it can come across the way it actually feels, which is like, oh my God, like I am freaking out right now. Let me make a joke of gallows humor to like to like ease my stress. Yeah, I'm trying to think of. I mean, I would be interested to hear what people who have played with me think are sort of the characteristics that I bring to every character. I've already mentioned a couple of them before, like the style of humor and sarcasm and things along those lines.
That's what I've noticed are pretty consistent.
Yeah. I don't tend to play characters who are not at least somewhat intelligent. It is hard for me to, it's hard for me to it's hard for me to take the academic out of the character, right? Like I've tried it. I always find myself playing the barbarian who's taking psychic damage, right? Because like they think too much.
You can take the character out of the academy, but you can't take the academy out of the character.
That is correct. And then like the thing is, because at least for me, that is a constant and I've noticed it. So I try to make sure that like whatever personality I'm emulating with the character is at least somewhat compatible with the proclivity towards like sarcasm and wit or wittiness or whatever you want to call it, because it's hard for me not to insert those just because that's the style of humor and conversation I default to. But like the difference between somebody who does that in a way that is like dark and macabre versus somebody who is very happy and like go lucky, like it's still a big difference, I think. So that's sort of what I try to keep in mind when I'm putting things out there.
The character traits I tend to play towards more are, I do like low intelligence characters a lot. I think it's fun to kind of almost in a way challenge yourself to kind of dumb down a little bit, at least in my opinion, and have that kind of, I don't know how to describe it, honestly. It feels right for me, and I'm comfortable playing that kind of character. I mean, just with the way I talk normally and stuff, it's the vocabulary fits like normal. I don't usually pull up very big words in my day-to-day adventures. So having that consistency also helps to get the character, because I can kind of play it more so like I am, instead of having to really try to emulate too much. of a personality.
Don't have to. You can just kind of go with the flow a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I don't
Don't
have to
have to
try
be
to
sitting there taking all of your notes, writing
taking
everything
my
down,
dictionary out and
pull out your
trying to find
thesaurus.
some big words. Yeah, I get a thesaurus out and start trying to sound all high and mighty.
What about
Toughest
you,
character for
Kyle?
me
Do
to
you
play.
prefer the intellectual or sort of lower intelligence, or are you comfortable playing the gamut?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, I'd tend to play the high intelligence characters. I don't like playing himbos or like dumb characters.
Oh, you're gonna love this campaign, my friend.
Oh boy. Yeah, just because I like to think creatively about situations, and then I also don't want to be like, like Grog from Critical Role. You know what I mean? Yeah.
All right. Again, we got another viewer came in. And here we are. Here's James jumping in.
Welcome.
Apparently, Nick learned how to transform uh, as he dropped out. Hi, James. Welcome. We're just having a bit of
Hi.
a roundtable discussion. It was kind of as we planned, just discussing getting into developing characters, kind of going with the flow a little bit. One of the things we've talked about so far, and we're going to put you right on the spot as soon as you
Oh,
jump
great.
in, uh, is where do you find inspiration for your characters?
Where do I find inspiration for my characters? Um, sometimes I think I mean, we were discussing a character for a different campaign, sort of finding hybrids of characters from shows or movies. So pulling bits that I think are interesting from them and trying to sort of smash them together.
Awesome, awesome. And then uh, one of the other questions I'm going to throw at you that we've kind of talked about a little bit is: are there, as you've developed a character and kind of found them, we were all talking about that we put parts of ourselves into them. Are there any things that you find, any aspects of yourself that you find just end up in every character that you play, or a lot of the characters are a very common thing, or things that you don't tend to play? Like a couple of us have said we, don't tend to play low intelligence characters. We struggle with that, or uh, preferring that, or characters that tend to be sarcastic pretty consistently. No matter what our characters are, they might be sarcastic. So,
Um, I think the intimidating or the kind of more um, yeah, I mean, if the character is going to be having sort of doing kind of intimidating or threatening, I find it hard to step into that space. So yeah, I think that's difficult.
you seem to do okay the other night with trying to intimidate the guards.
That was more by actions. That was easier to do, to describe the actions that I would do that was threatening than to do like um to verbalize it. So it was more yeah, I could think through how would I behave, but it's more sort of backseat driving to do that than to step into the role.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And then uh, kind of, I think, to close out this topic of like how we find our inspiration and put ourselves into the character, uh, or parts of ourselves that make it into a character as we find the inspiration. I think I want to ask everyone and just chime in when you have an answer. We can go round robin style. Start with Evan, go to James, Nick, then Kyle. Um, for any of our viewers or anybody that's watching, what would you recommend as kind of a three-step process if someone feels, I guess first, if someone has no experience making a character, figuring out how to get into character and kind of find that inspiration, what would you say they should do to get inspired to build their first character? Evan.
um, what I would recommend would be go through your favorite shows, books, movies, take your favorite characters, things you like from them, and maybe things you don't like about them. Take both into account, and just kind of throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. See what you enjoy, and get a basic idea of what kind of character you think would be fun to play, and give it a shot. No, doesn't hurt jumping in and just seeing if it works.
All right. James.
I'm the least probably experienced of putting a character together to here. And that, I don't know. I think for your first character, that sounds like a lot of groundwork. I mean, maybe if you find something that inspires you and it's exciting, go for it. But otherwise, I don't think it's terrible to find your character as you go. That you can, as you go through a few sessions, you start layering up the character, and like maybe it wasn't all thought out in advance. Maybe you're finding the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle as you go and build the picture, and that can be a fun way to find a character. And I'm sure, like, yes, coming up with a fully fleshed out is a rewarding experience. But
Well,
maybe
I
it's
think
like
that,
for a first character, you can build it as you go.
and I think that part of the process, whether it's your first character or your millionth, is such a key component to developing a fun and enjoyable character. Is just finding those pieces, starting with whatever you have, and then letting it build as you play the game.
Right.
Nick, what about you?
Yeah, no, I would actually say a mix of both, really. So for me, it's that I would say, like, you don't need to come in with like everything from their favorite food to their favorite color and like what classes they took in high school and how many crushes they had and things like that. But like a basic personality idea just to come in with is probably good. You can, the thing that can always change, right? But coming in with a complete blank slate can be hard. So like even if it's a couple of words or some sentences, if you have any like a sense of the voice, it doesn't have to be permanent. Again, change is good, and like you don't want to restrict yourself to something that starts and like you have to stick with it. But at the same time, like I found that there is a happy medium between coming in with nothing and coming in with ideas that shift and change. But I do think that what James said is a really important one, which is be ready to change and develop with the story. I tend to think that if you have at least the basic building blocks, then changing and developing with the story in a way that is logical and fun is easier because you know how your character, or you have a sense how they would respond to one situation or another, and then you get a better sense of them as that goes on. It just gives you a little bit more consistency. And like some of my favorite experiences, and Frosty can speak to this, have been with characters who start as something and become not completely different. Like the core is still there, but develop in wild ways that I would never have anticipated. And part of the reason that I think, again, whether it's your first character or your millionth, that you can do that if you just have like even those basic building blocks or the basic sense of like what parts of me am I trying to channel into this character? Like if I'm channeling this part, if I'm channeling my class clown, how would my class clown respond to this? Like that kind of thing. I'm not suggesting you channel your class clown into D&D. That can be a bit chaos monkey, but like, yeah, so it's a bit of a mix of the two. This is kind of the approach that I would usually take.
Kyle, advice for people trying to find inspiration for their first character?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would think about who you're playing with and your DM, like whether or not it's like a first campaign for everybody, like a semi-serious or serious. But overall, just have fun with it. If you're going into it, newly experienced. Most of the classes, I mean, if you look at the names, they play like their archetypes. Pick out what you think would fit you the best, and have fun with it. Just realize your first character is not going to be perfect. There may be tropes that you do, and you might die, and you might not have super good role play. You might not have an optimal experience, but have fun with it and you evolve. So you may just want to have that super non-serious play style, or that may evolve into, you liking more serious role playing, getting more into character, and however your play style. Um, Love it, enjoy it, and just it evolves. That's what it.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a good point there in figuring out, are you playing Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Are you playing Lord of the Rings? Or are you playing Game of Thrones? Right. You want to come into that with, you know, a character that's going to fit in. You don't want, right? You don't want Aragorn showing up looking for the Holy Grail amongst the knights. It's just not going to go well. And vice versa, the Black Knight showing up in Game of Thrones, while hilarious, might create a very different tone and cause some disruption. And I think a lot of people try and shy away from tropes. And that would be, I think, my big advice is don't worry if it's a trope. Sometimes tropes are tropes for a reason. They give us something to kind of latch onto and foundations and building blocks. And we now, in the modern day, have wikis. I can't remember what it's called, but we have a whole wiki of all of the different tropes that exist. And it seems unique, but there's a guy who basically did the exact same thing all by himself for folk tales from all around the world and history back in like 1915 or 1920 or something like that. It was and codified if it's got a fairy godmother, if it's got a witch, if it's, has to do with reclaiming a sword or something like that. And, you know, our stories have been, I'd say there's nothing original under the sun, just new ways of kind of combining it. Um, but kind of everything is original. So if you start with a trope or an idea or just something small that kind of hooks your interest, um, run with it. And as everyone else said, let the game kind of evolve. Find what gives you a trajectory would be my recommendation. Whatever is kind of gives you the inspiration that says this is the direction my character wants to go, and then roll with all the hills, bumps, pitfalls, and traps along the way. Would be kind of my thing for first character, but for those viewers that are just chiming in, if you guys have any questions or comments for any of the cast or any of the subjects we're talking about, feel free to chime in. I can see those and we'll pass them right along to either myself, Kyle, Evan, James, or Nick. So don't be shy. Jump on in. But I think the next topic, we gave some advice to the first people, but if someone is an experienced role player and feels fairly confident, what would be your advice to giving them to make something that they wouldn't normally? How would you recommend someone step out of whatever box they're in or experience they have and go to whatever next level is awaiting them? Evan.
Well, I don't think I'm very qualified for this topic.
How would you approach it?
I would try to go out of my comfort zone a little bit. It's like I said, like to play low intelligence characters. Maybe try for a high intelligence character and see how it goes. Again, just trying new things. If I find a one shot, someone's running a one shot, join in, try something new, see how that goes. I know one shots may not be typically RP heavy, but it can give you a nice groundwork for how a character can play.
Experimentation.
Yeah, and then also getting to try new classes and whatnot. That way as well.
Awesome. James, what about you?
Again, not the right one not qualified, but to the same question that you asked Evan, yes, yeah, and almost the same answer, stepping out of the comfort zone. So, like my character coming into this has got a very low charisma, and I'm still working through what that's gonna play as. Whether it's a brusque and rude that's causing the charisma to be so low, or if it's a sort of awkward bumblingness that causes issues in the conversations and connecting with people. And I think that the Bruscan route is probably further out of my comfort zone, but it's actually where I think that the character fits that I've seen. So, and to the earlier point of having your character fit with the other players, that's where I also have a little bit of nervousness. Do I make a character that's too annoying to the rest of the party? And is that going to cause friction? And so,
well, and that's going to lead into, I think, our next topic.
Then I will leave it be for now.
Nick.
I mean, first of all, not to take offense, but a brusque character can still be very charismatic if played correctly.
I think someone got called out.
not that this is the plan, which it totally is. But yeah, I think that leaning. The thing is, when it comes to getting out of my comfort zone, it also tends to be about kind of like the themes I'm exploring with the character, not necessarily the personality. Because I think that a lot of the evolution in a long form game doesn't necessarily come from the base personality or the stats of the character, although it can. It also comes from like what kind of arcs you're looking to explore, and that of course necessitates you having a party and a DM who are like responsive to that. And you're like, hey, like this is something I'm interested in examining. Is this going to be possible in the world, or is it completely out of left field? Like I know Kyle mentioned at the beginning, like Cthulhian and like cosmic horror. Like if that's not going to fit, then that's not going to fit. But like I think exploring different kinds of arcs is one of the things that I've found at least pushes me furthest out of my comfort zone, but also gets, I want to say like the realist RP out of me. But you know, if
how would you push that to a new level?
Push what?
If a player was at a point where they're like, I do great characters and I'm amazing. I've played all these characters. I get into it. It's kind of at this high end. How would they go to the next level? How can they take what you're saying and
again,
experience?
what I was saying was push themselves into arcs that they haven't explored, not characters that they haven't explored. So I think that it's like, you can explore a heroic knight saving the kingdom, and that same heroic knight going through sort of a strange, transformative, semi-madness cosmic horror arc is going to be a very different experience. So like the same personality going through a different arc will really, I think, push you. That's not to say that, that I don't think changing the personality up is important. I just think that in my experience, at least, the things that push me personally out of my comfort zone more are arc oriented or narrative oriented rather than character oriented. That could be because I've played a lot of characters, or it could just be because like I feel like when I'm a little bit less in control of what's going on, my responses are more genuine.
All right. And Kyle?
Yeah, I think a really good thing to explore if you're trying to push yourself as a new player, explore new things, is picking a class or subclass that you haven't done before or explored, just because different classes, subclasses play very differently, and they help you generate good ideas when it comes to characters and stories, because just because thematically they match that. And then flaws, I think, are a very good place to start. Exploring new flaws for your character. Maybe they're a drug addict. Maybe they have anger issues. Picking a different flaw for every character is very good because it humanizes them. Because no one is perfect, and then from that, I think from flaws you can generate a lot of good things. Yeah,
I think that's incredible. I think that's pretty much, you guys have touched on everything I would say. Kind of push those new boundaries, explore something new, try the class combination that you wouldn't. Um, One of the things I've also found is extremely helpful for just getting the brain going and getting you into mindsets that you don't normally have, and was an extremely useful exercise for me as a GM way back when, was taking letting someone else make the character and just handing them to you, giving you the backstory and their stats in class and being like, go. And you got five minutes to look it over, see what they did, and just run with it. Right. And and that and just like, you start passing those around. You make each other's characters and then you swap them, right? Taking away that control and just getting handed something that you have to bring to life, I think that would be my recommendation, is just go off the walls and remove yourself from having control over what you're playing and let someone else do it, and then play that. Um,
I just want to add that's like a really good idea. Just because as a player you're constrained with your own mind and you have your own ideas, no matter how much you do. But then you have someone else's experience and viewpoints coming in. I That's awesome. I've never heard that before. That's
uh, all right. Well, I think our next topic. I think an important thing before we get into bringing the character to life, I think an important thing is talking about how you balance the meta of the game. Because I think a lot of players and a lot of GMs say meta's bad, right? You don't want a meta game at all. You don't want to have that outside. And there's definitely, I think, disruptive forms of metagaming. Information you wouldn't have, kind of pulling. There's an old habit of having people, step away from the outside the room at a local game, or going deaf on the chat. And I think that that's a tool to be used sparingly, but being able to trust the players at a table to hear what's going on, but not bring that into character, I think is an important thing. But what I'm talking about is, how do you guys balance the meta when the town crier runs into the bar and is like, here, the king seeks, knights to go and venture and save the lost princess, right? Like, we've all had those players or experiences where it's been like, no, my character wouldn't do that. I'm just going to sit back at the bar and we're all going to chat. Or the other one that's like, I'm going to go murder him and take his gold. Or, runs off and is like, I don't care that everybody's chilling at the bar. I'm going to go off on this adventure on my own, and kind of reading the room and finding that go with the flow meta attitude of seeing the story and leaning into it with your character and finding, as I say, the why your character would do the thing, as opposed to it's what my character would do mentality. And I'm curious as to your guys' perspective on that and where you're coming at it from when you play. Let's start with James, since we haven't started with him yet.
Thrown in there.
Yep, right into the fire.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, the broader metagaming questions. It's yeah. When you get down to sort of like if there's sort of bartering between the players as who has the slightly higher stat to do a particular thing, I think that kind of breaks the feel of it a little, because and sometimes I check myself where like I think my character would do something and I think, oh, actually I'm going to be really shitty at that role, somebody else should do that. Like, well, no, I thought he was going to do that. He should go ahead and do that. You don't want to be game breaking. I had this in the Cyberpunk campaign. I had a character who kept hallucinating, and like early on, that was pretty disruptive. He's experiencing a different reality to the rest of the party, and that's a little bit weird. To like, how is it? Everyone's like, well, he's useless. What? But to find ways to twist that so that I kept that sort of story arc going, but at the same time was actually fully functional and was playing pretty much as if I was a fully functional, capable member of the party that people could actually trust, whilst this weird narrative was happening on top. And that took a little, I think, to get sort of trust in the party that I wasn't just like wee, like rainbows, sparkles, stuff.
Right. We had to, we were both very conscious of the meta need to still be involved in the situation going on, and
yeah, it couldn't just be this sort of this psychedelic trip that was going on. I still had to fulfill my role in the party. I still had to be the one who could open a lock. I still had to be the one who could defeat a security device. And so, yeah, that was a fun balance going through on that one. And yeah, there's definitely there is a game people are playing. There is a role to be played. But there were when it got good, it was okay. Now I can tie that. I can find ways of telling stories with that slightly weirdness, and make it both practical and fun. And that's where it's working really well. And so yeah, the meta can sometimes make for good story too if you balance it right.
Right. Nick, you're up next.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that too little meta is game breaking as much as too much meta is game breaking. If everybody was just playing their character exactly as they would play, as that character would play, like how many people would actually go on the adventure to slay the dragon? It's a giant fire breathing lizard. You have better things to do with your time than get burned to a crisp by that, right? Like
Right.
it's like you have to find reasons to do stuff that seems a little insane to an everyday person. And of course, I think it helps that most characters, at least in D&D, are probably by everyday standards a little nutty. I do think that some things that I found are most problematic in the tendency of like people who are very dedicated to roleplay but sometimes forget the necessity of meta, doing things like not participating in a combat or otherwise doing things that can generate resentment, because if somebody gets killed because one person was sitting off on the sidelines and being like, well, I don't have a stake in this fight, it can be a little, there's that's something that requires a very high level of trust, I think, between party members to really not make that an issue,
and for it not to become personal and
yeah, exactly,
and step out of bounds.
Right, exactly. I think that for the most part, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would give people, or that I found most useful, is that while everyone is discussing what to do or just having downtime, like that is the time, I think, to be as fully your character as you can be. So if your character wouldn't be participating in the conversation, great, like you can go sit up on the side. If your character would be, but would be being a recalcitrant bastard, or like a silly person, just a very silly person, member of the silly party, like fantastic. But like if there's a group thing or consensus, unless it's fundamentally opposed to some core principle of your character, my experience is that you should find a way to at least accompany the group, if not enthusiastically. Like you can be the voice of reason, you can be the dissenting voice, you can be the person who's like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this the entire time, but just staying back and taking yourself out of the situation entirely is boring for you, because it means you're just not going to be doing anything unless the DM goes back to you in the bar and is asking you who you're talking to while everyone else is saving the princess. But B, like it can be disruptive in other ways, I think. So those would be my pieces of advice.
Kyle.
Yeah, I think it starts at the beginning of the game, is as a DM trying to create, obviously you have a narrative, you have a story to tell, and there's a central theme. And having your players create those characters around that central theme. So, for example, maybe your central idea of your campaign is taking down a tyrannical king. And so you ask your players, you can do whatever you want with your backstory. Just, why would they hate a tyrannical king? Why would they be opposed to that? Why would they participate in rebellion? I think, or maybe they're against taking down a cult. Why would they be against taking down a cult? I think it's a very good place to start and brings characters together to participate, and it gives players a lot of freedom to create whatever kind of character they want. And I agree with Nick. There is obviously, I don't agree with like a non-meta game, character and stuff like that. It's a little bit of a meta game because you want to sit together and you want to tell a good story. You don't want to be disruptive.
Right. You don't want to be sitting there being like, well, I wouldn't do that, so you guys can't.
Yeah, doing nothing in the combat. You kidding me? Yeah, so I agree with Nick
Go ahead,
a lot
fight
there.
the dragon. See if I care.
Right.
No,
Have fun burning.
So I think it starts with there as a DM is creating that prompt for your players to bring them together, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Maybe they're very sociable and they want friends, and that's why they want to be together at the party and help them. And at the end of the day, if you have a player who just keeps on choosing not to participate and stuff like that, just because that's what their character would do, they're probably not a good fit for your campaign.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think as a DM, that's where you want to kind of talk to the player and be like, hey, like, what's going on, and try and work this. There's a lot of arguments over, well, it's what my character would do and this, and it can be disruptive. But I'm curious, Evan, your thoughts?
I agree with Nick. What Nick said. There are times, downtime for the party when there's nothing really going on. That's more of your moment to go off and do your own kind of, I got to get this done, or I want to have this kind of quick little thing go on. When there's not a driving point being made at the time. Especially like, say we just had a big scene, and now we're all at the tavern just chilling. Now is the time we go, oh, I've got to run to town real quick and grab this, or it's not doing it during the middle of an intense conversation to two characters and go, all of a sudden, oh, I got to go do this. Sorry. And just kind of taking away from that moment in the game, kind of creating the space when it's necessary.
Awesome. All right. I think that was a great touch on that topic. I think now we get into the fun stuff. Giving your character a voice. Finding your character's voice. This is always a fun one. People always are especially new players will come to a table and be like, do I have to do a funny voice? Do I have to talk in some I don't know how to do a little voice. What's the answer here? I'm not sure I can do a British accent. Whatever it happens to be, and it's like, no, you don't have to. I think everyone should know when you're coming to the table, you don't have to do a silly voice, if any, or a comedic voice or an accent or change your voice or anything. You don't really have to do anything. You can just bring you to the table and your conversation. But one thing that can be interesting to explore is giving your character a voice. And that can be, a lot of people think that the only way to do that is through some sort of voice acting, accenting extravagance or ministry of silly voices. But I want to touch on this a little bit before we get into the discussion, but it can be helpful to just think of how they talk, the dialect, the word choice, or vocabulary, I should say, or speech pattern. Do they talk real fast? Are you always kind of busy and in a rush, like squirreling away? Like, oh no, I've got to get busy. I've got all these things I got to do. I'm late. I don't even know what I'm late for, but I know I'm late for it because I should have been there already, and then I'd know what it is, right? Kind of talking fast, or are they slow, methodical, calculating? There's a lot of things on YouTube and everything for that, but those are ways you can find and explore your character. But I would like to talk to each of you and kind of bring it up to pass it. As we all know, I have so many fun voices that I throw around. But how do you find?
Drama.
You know how do you find the voice of your characters, right? If you're sitting there trying to get into everything and you're like, I think this guy's a real tough guy, or I'm making this character up. How do I find his voice? And I don't think we've started with Kyle yet, so Kyle, take it away. How do you bring your character's voice to life? How do you find your character's voice, whatever it happens to be?
As a new person coming into it, I like voices a lot. I mean, obviously, you don't have to do a voice, but voices actually have a function. It's really useful, if you're DMing or as a player, to know when someone is talking in person or out of person. It's very helpful. So that's just a very helpful part of it. It's also just kind of fun. And it could be as simple as just kind of raising the tone of your voice, like you said, changing the cadence, stuff like that. But
that's the word I was looking for.
But
pitch and tempo.
Absolutely. But doing accents is what I like to do a lot of. So, like Russian, Scottish, Irish, and stuff like that. And it's really hard, but it's really fun and rewarding when you're able to go and pick up on that and translate that into a character, because it just makes them very different. Yeah.
All right. Nick, you're up next.
I mean, like Kyle, I do enjoy doing voices. That is also a personal preference because I do enjoy acting. And
a bit of theater.
A bit of theater. A bit of the theater, darling. We should go to the theater today. But I do think that sorry, I just went into a voice, so I'm going to stick with it now, because the point that I was going to make is about sticking with it, that it doesn't really necessarily need to be a huge change, right? This is more me lowering the pitch of my voice slightly, putting a slight more British accent on it, and sort of channeling a bit of my inner Stuart, but that's about it. It doesn't have to be crazy. I think people come in thinking, I've got to be Jester from, it doesn't, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do anything. It's more important that you, I think at least, pick something to start with. If it develops, it develops. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But stick with it and let it grow. For me, the usefulness of it is, as Kyle said, it separates out of character questions from in character conversation, but also it separates my voice from my characters. And the more I play a character, the more I notice that when I'm speaking in their voice, I will lose a little bit of control of them, and they will do things. And afterwards I'll be like, oh shit, that was a really stupid idea. But I guess that was the situation, I mean, both Kyle and Frosty can speak to this, but I've had characters mouth off to people who they absolutely should not have been mouthing off to, and just been like, yep, bad idea, bad idea in retrospect, but makes sense. And I think that if you're in terms of if you're trying to pick a voice for a character, I would say accent is less important than pitch, tone, and tempo. So for this campaign, it's sort of going with a more gravelly one, just because I feel like that represents a bit of the character who I'm going for. But yeah, that's.
How do you find it? Kyle, you guys were talking about the importance of voice, but I'm curious, how do you find your character's voice?
In the mirror until I'm happy with what I have.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't sound sexy or fun, but if you're preparing for a campaign or you have an idea, I talk to myself enough normally that I can just.
You just don't want to be walking around the street doing funny voices.
Oh, you would be surprised. I walk around the street doing funny voices plenty. Thank you very much. But yeah, it's just I will cycle through things until I find something that I think fits. And it, takes a little time sometimes, but not
you
insane.
Just go through the process and experiment until.
Yeah, basically.
Kyle, what about you? How do you find?
Yeah, exactly what Nick was saying. Just standing in front of the mirror, just kind of going through your daily life. But what I like to do, what helps me a lot, is repeating a phrase. So I like to say, I'm blank. So I'm your character's name, whatever you want. And then I just kind of repeat that phrase until, whatever I sound just sounds good. So you can start increasing the tempo, change the cadence, doing the accent, stuff like that. And then just kind of it just kind of fits. It kind of feels good. That's what you can go for.
The Bond James Bond approach.
Well, yeah,
Like every Bond has their way of saying it. So you
Yeah.
just sit there and kind of Bond, James Bond. No,
in
no,
voice
that's not
acting,
quite
we
right.
called it like a cue. We called it a cue line, right? Or like just like it, like some that I use for Hadrian are like, "Fuck off." I'm Hadrian. Like my name's Hadrian. Who the fuck are you? Things like that, right? Like I use other lines for different.
And we lost him.
Andrew has that. Yeah.
And we lost him. And you're
Pressed
back.
it for a
All
second.
right.
Sorry.
James, what about you?
Oh, what about me? I mean, I would love to be able to do the accent thing, and it's funny because I will try the mirror thing, and I will find a voice, and I think yes, I found a voice. That's the one I want. And then I'll try. I was like, nope, I've forgotten it. I've lost it. I can't bring it back. I don't have. It's hard for me to re-find it, and so I like a total lack of consistency is kind of why I am nervous about trying it. I think I'll probably be particularly nervous about trying it in a streaming environment, but I should try it in our private sessions a little more. And it's interesting that comment about the key phrase. I don't know if it's going to feel a little sort of weird to keep dropping that. Oh, lost someone. To keep dropping that in, but then I'm thinking, I've just started watching like the first season of Critical Role, and I'm hello, I'm Tiberius Stormwind. I hail from Draconia. Like he sort of seemed to start off with that so often that it feel like maybe that was his key phrase.
For Bruce, it's I gotta do the
And so maybe I should try finding a key phrase that's not too long and not too annoying to be able to re-find the voice. Because I'd like to try. But then aside from that, back to the cadence, that I find easier to have characters. I think I find it hard to make the word choice shift. I think that would take some more practice to deliberately shift my vocabulary. But to Nick's point of when you're really in voice, your character goes off and does things that you're not consciously thinking about. I had a character who, my way of portraying them, they wouldn't tell stories in a linear order. They would bounce back and forth because they were kind of scatterbrained a little bit in terms of making any conversation go. And when you start talking in a non-linear way and you start bouncing back and forth, you just start saying way more than you should. And that character got himself into an awful lot of trouble a number of times doing exactly that. And you find yourself going, oh God, what have my done? God.
Out of curiosity, was that Gem?
That was Gem, yes.
Yeah.
So many times.
What about
the
you?
running joke with Kiros, Frosty? He knows how to talk, but not when to shut up.
Right.
Can I get a Spark Notes?
Sum it up for me.
What about you, Evan?
I like to do voices, whether it be completely changing my voice or just changing the cadence. Like I play Garth's voice. I came up with 10 minutes from session 1, I think.
Give us a bit of a sample.
God's voice a little like this. I just kind of lower my voice, put a little accent on it, and that's about it. It's nothing high class acting or nothing, but it gets the job done. You know when I'm talking in character and when I'm not. So I came with that 10 minutes from session 1, just kind of playing through like.
So when we were sitting there just shooting the shit, you were like, okay.
Yeah. Like I gotta find a voice.
I gotta find a voice, man.
Fuck. Let's go through a couple options. Oh, that's why I like this one. I can do this one. Cool. Pick a voice. If you're gonna do a voice, pick a voice. It's easy to replicate. Something you can do consistently. Like James mentioned, the consistency is the hardest part. Getting it down pat. But try things. If you go into session 1, give it a shot. I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna yell at you if your session 1 voice is different than your session 2 voice.
I will.
Well,
I don't think anyone's.
that's me intimidated. Okay.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I don't think anyone's
Sarcasm,
gonna
Well, I
darling.
think-
scream at you for that.
Yeah, I'm not a professional voice actor or anything.
Right.
In the sense that for videos, but in a way it is a part of what I do. I'm a professional GM and doing voices is part of it. I've only got so many that I can do, but you know, even if you watch Critical Role, you'll find that when you've got a lot of characters or various voices or anything, or it's been a while since you've used a particular character and their particular voice, it'll change. You can't help it. They kind of find their own rhythm and cadence, and
Yeah.
and I think that's part of going in and trying it until
Yeah.
you stumble into the voice of the character. That for me is just go in doing it, try it, and find the voice. Much like we were talking about, find
Yeah.
their trajectory.
And like once you find it, you kind of know. I feel like you know it's. I think when I first tried Hadrian's voice, like I had a bit like he was speaking a bit softer and more of a British accent going to it, and I was like, no, I want it to be gravelier, and also it was easier for me to stick with that than I thought it would be. Like my worry going in was that I wouldn't be able to talk after 2 hours, but it turns out I could. So like you know that was that you find that stuff and you settle into it. Like I've had players say that like by session, you know, like even very new ones, like by session 6, they said like, you know, now like I know what my character sounds like. Like they went back and forth. Like I had one who started as like, yeah, he was playing like a California surfer bro, man, and then like he got a little more chill as time went on, and now his character just talks like this all the time, and it's hilarious. But it took him a bit to get there, and now he is, and he doesn't lose it. So
Awesome. I think with this we're going to take a brief break, and then we will all be back to take on our next topic. And I think we'll just kind of toss it around a little bit. Stay tuned. And we're back. We're back. Oh, I thought we had Kyle. We lost Kyle for a second. He'll be back. Um,
He'll be
so,
back.
welcome everyone. We're just taking a brief break. Um, and I think now we can kind of open it up. One of the things that we were kind of talking about was how to lean into emotional scenes or character changes and growth arcs and allowing your character to evolve or react to things that you don't necessarily plan on, and these big changes that can happen to a character that can almost completely overhaul them, or struggling with, characters that struggle with sanity, and uh, characters that go through intense scenes and situations where you either want to be in a scene or learning how to recognize how to join in a scene or step out of a scene. Um, and James, you briefly during our break were talking about some desires that you had and concerns and like things that you wanted, and I'd love for you to touch on those with our audience
Yeah,
and kind of
yeah,
start
sure.
the conversation there.
Yeah. I mean, I was just saying, I'm comfortable with like playing my character in the here and now. I have an idea of who they are. I have an idea of how they would react. But building, Nick was talking about story arcs. That is aspirational to me. It's easy to think I'm at the level of a character where I can fit to my stats, but the idea of the longer motivation, the driving force, why are they getting out of bed every day? Where are they going? What do they want? Um, I find that much harder to see how to build that out in a believable way. It's far more immediate and present, and so yeah, I'd welcome tips on building those kind of arcs out.
Um, Evan and Nick, you guys both have some experience with that, especially recently. Which one of you wants to jump in first?
I mean,
Take it away, Nick.
okay, yeah, as I
Take it
say,
away.
I
I
have a
need some
lot to
time.
say on this topic, so it's like, so
I need some time.
again, I would say that being in the moment and having motivations and a narrative arc are not mutually exclusive. In fact, that they are necessary corollaries. Again, I started like one of the campaigns I've been playing with Frosty in. I started with a character who had no motivations. In fact, was almost defined by ennui and rejection of motivations, and went through a series of what a friend, a fellow gamer, called quintessential roleplay moments, which were difficult and emotional or fun, like having like hour-long debates, or like moments where I, as a person, was learning about something in the character's past and feeling the revulsion or the sadness, like right along with him. And that, it can be hard from an emotional standpoint, right? I did find myself occasionally after scenes being like, damn, I need a drink, or like I need to like walk away for a second and like take a breather, because that was a lot. And I mean, it, particularly speaking of characters who struggle with sanity, again, not to give too many details, but like I think that Frosty, you as a DM have shown a pretty expert capacity to put players in the mindset of somebody struggling with reality through a mix of the meta and the game. And running with those moments and the changes, and then talking and thinking about narrative arcs, is, I think, a way to build a great story. It just does also require that you have like party members and a DM who are willing to talk with you about that. Because one thing that has been a theme is that things will happen and I will chat with all my fellow players like, wow, what did that mean? Like that kind of thing. Because part of it is sort of making people aware of what you're thinking. I, as a player, do think that like sometimes that kind of out of game communication is almost a necessary midpoint to helping everyone's character feel real, because, you know, in reality, your characters are spending every moment of every day pretty close together, but we're time skipping, like we're not doing and like, so you would learn things and know things about the motivations of your fellow party members that, you know, you won't pick up on just from 4 hours a week. And so having those discussions and helping people realize like where you're coming from in the moments of silence, and having a DM who is willing to talk to you about that, I think it's the difference between living moment to moment, but not creating a narrative arc, and creating a narrative arc by living moment to moment. I think that, like, again, that it's a it's a semantic difference, but it's also an enormous one, because we do, I think, as people, live moment to moment. And if you were to ask me, Nick, what my quote unquote long-term motivations were, I'd be like, I don't know, like get a job next year, maybe, don't die in the meantime. Like, you know, like,
if I can find that dragon that killed my family, maybe have a talk with him. Take him
have a
back.
talk, take him out back, introduce him to the good feathers. It's the pigeon mafia, you know, it's a whole thing. But like, yeah, I think that and one of the things, and I'll stop here because I know, like, again, like I said, I had thoughts on this topic, but one of the things that I think is a lot of fun is you can come up with like plausible motivations and plausible arcs, but be willing to step around within them. Mm-hmm. So I know, again, with Frosty, I've talked a lot about different potential arcs, and I found myself occasionally stepping onto one of the potential arcs that I didn't want, or like I wasn't interested in, or I didn't think I wanted, but I was like, you know what, like it made sense at the time, let's explore this and see where it actually leads. And it I mean, I don't know whether this is me having issues or just a thing, but from talking to people, I think it's probably more of a thing that, like, sometimes it's hard to separate yourself entirely from the ups and downs of a character who you are attached to or who you've been playing for a while. And I don't think that's a bad thing. As long as you have a group that is like understanding and supportive of that. Because I know I've had players who expect like that kind of bleed to be dismissed as something wrong with the way that they're playing the game, and I don't think that that's necessarily.
And I want to respond to that before we go on to Evan and Kyle, but I think for me, there is, what I strive for and what some other GMs strive for is the same level of immersion as we would get in your favorite book or favorite TV show. And when you are watching a narrative or experiencing a narrative, we go on the ride with the characters, especially the ones that we relate to or connect to or in some way see ourselves a reflection of. And I think when a role-playing game can give you that same experience to where you are empathizing with your character and feeling the ebb and flow along with the narrative, it can be as moving and touching or tragic or exhilarating as it is with your favorite book or favorite TV show. And it can be, I think, for some players a little uncomfortable when they're jumping in and kind of looking at it as, I'm playing a game, and looking at it as a game and like Monopoly or Sorry, and we're moving stuff around the board and rolling dice.
The shoe.
It can catch them off guard or be overwhelming. to suddenly be in this narrative, be like, whoa, that's not what I want, and some of that is player investment of being like, this is a narrative experience, and it's something I think that, especially with the popularity of Critical Role and other streaming games, uh, players are starting to see that, and I think some of us have always felt it with our games, but I think it's definitely becoming a broader thing where we are seeing
Yeah.
that this is, as I like to put it, a modern day campfire story. You've got the GM standing around the campfire kind of telling this story with the players, but we're all involved in the campfire now. We're all creating those myths and legends and lores and fairy tales and folk tales that we're going to pass on to our children or tell to our friends or have an experience in our life where we can look back at the story we experienced in role playing and take some of that experience and apply it to our lives as we would a narrative or a story or a folk tale. Uh, at least I see that as the potential,
Yeah.
and why I think it can be fun to, and
And,
that next step of immersing yourself in that. But that's how I wanted to respond. But I wanted to pass it to Evan on how do you kind of get into the scene and deal with tough
oh
emotional
God.
scenes or get into the narrative and
I, I,
develop
I,
sort
I
of
just
these
I,
long story arcs.
I just want to say, Frosty, and I know Evan will agree with this, but like I have laughed and cried and been angry and been like involved, and it's
It's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot, but you see the story developing and you feel like, I think as you said, like D&D at its most aspirational is like you writing your own epic story in real time. And I think that, yeah, Evan, anyway.
Uh, so I am going through a big character arc in our game on Saturdays, and it is very interesting. It's I've been playing the same character for a long time, and I've kind of played him a certain way, and now everything's almost like it's been flipped on its head, and it's an interesting perspective now, having to run through all these possibilities of how this arc could turn out, and what it means for the character, and how I'll play the character afterwards. Whether that means I need some time away from the character to figure out what I'm gonna do, or it means that I just have to kind of figure it out, just fly with the story, see where it takes me. So getting especially the heavier scenes or scenes that are impactful for your character, just go with
Because
it.
your character's been through some pretty heavy stuff.
He has, yeah. He's had some pretty emotional scenes, uh, especially lately. um, so it's go with the story. When something's thrown on your plate, go for it. Just I just kind of usually I kind of blank out and just fly on instinct. Whatever makes sense at the time goes, and we'll figure out the consequences later. Kind of how it would be in real life. You have something unexpected come, you either fight or flight, deal with it there or run away. So that's usually I handle some of the heavier kind of scenes with my character, and just generally getting into scenes. It's a lot easier when the whole party's involved. When it's just yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, when it's just one or two people, it can kind of be tough to get a consistent role playing, consistent story going. So if your whole party's involved in a game, it makes it so much easier for everyone to kind of get their voice, and the characters get even more defined out, and it makes it, in my opinion, the more defined your character is, the easier it is to play.
And how do you shape that into sort of this arcing story and motivation that you've had for the character?
Um,
Because he has been on a pretty consistent trajectory.
mhm. Yeah, he's been on a consistent trajectory, and then again, something got thrown on my plate, and I was like, "Oh shit! Now what do I do?" Just kind of in the moment, just flip the switch and go with this new thing that just happened. Um, it's hard to do. It's very tough to do, but just go with it. Is my advice. Just
So you're saying just kind of
Again,
let the story snowball
yeah,
in whatever direction it's going to go.
kind of worry about the consequences later, almost. Kind of think of what the impact's going to be a little bit,
Mhm.
but don't focus on the impact and then
Make decisions
uh,
based on that.
make decisions based on that. Just kind of do go on instinct almost, and just do what you feel is right in that moment.
Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I agree with the message Evan's saying. Is that you just have to roll with whatever happens to your character, good or bad. And I think overall that goes to like a really good arc. And then something that I like to think about is like Game of Thrones is think about like characters how their arcs play out because they're like really good and there's like a very huge variety of character arcs in that. Good characters going to bad, bad characters who seem like they're going good but then go bad. Bad characters.
Bad characters go bad. Really, everyone is just bad, actually, except that
Yeah.
one
Think
guy who
about it.
held the door.
Yeah, but then just realize that there's an arc might not play out how you'd like it to, and I mean it's okay. Um,
For
yeah,
me,
just rolling with it.
sorry, didn't mean to
That's
cut
it.
you off there.
Just I was agreeing with Evan, just rolling with it. And if you really disagree with how it's being taken, talk to the DM and stuff like that.
For me, I like to think that, and this is a response to James' kind of essay. Like, I'm in the moment, I can play the character, but I don't know how to take it to the, having this sort of long form motivation kind of story arc, um, or how to put a character on that kind of trajectory, so to speak. And some of that is, in my games, that's partially my job as the GM. Is I'll test and kind of throw different pings and points at characters and see what they bite at, right? What are they going to latch onto or want to go down the road, um, and that tells me ideas to kind of chain reaction that into a path. But what can be helpful, I think, is kind of getting a trajectory for the character. If I'm playing or if I'm working on an NPC, I have no idea what the players are going to do in a session, or I might have a few inclinations as to where they might go or whatnot. But if I'm going to introduce a villain or an NPC, um, I like to think about. I don't want to say there's a really great guy on YouTube that I've watched. I think it's called How to Be a Great GM. I think his name is Guy something or something Guy, and he says it comes down to the fundamentals of for any character what do they want and why are they having trouble getting it is kind of his expression, and I think that can be an important step, but to me I always default back to logic. Um, looking at what's happened and what is a logical extrapolation of that, and kind of picking a trajectory for that logic for a character, right? If the story I've set up is that they are a princess that's run away from their home and is doing that, I take a look at what's the character's internal logic first for their motivations and reasoning, and then I look at if this is the way that they think in their own sort of logical consistency, then what do they want? And where does that put them? And sometimes it's as simple as I have an idea for a story arc I want to play, or I want there to be a story arc for the villain. He's going to be some horrible. He's a dark wizard who lost his family and ended up becoming a necromancer because he wants to resurrect his daughters that were killed in sub tragedy, right?
Never heard of that before.
Uh,
Never played that villain.
and
What?
so it becomes, that's the direction he's going. He has that goal. He's trying to resurrect his daughters. Um, and then whatever kind of happens in the game, I kind of look at how does that impact that goal. Um, but I start with kind of the logic of the character because it's hard for me to find what the character wants. What is the thing that they want and are having trouble getting if I don't understand the logic behind the person? Right. I could throw things at the dartboard and be like, well, that sounds interesting. He's having trouble getting his donkey across the ocean. He's having trouble uh, growing plants in his beautiful garden. Yeah, I can start spitballing, but if I know the logic of the character, I can say, here's how he thinks, here's how he works. This event happened in his life. He just lost his job. That means he needs to find a job. He's got a particular set of skills that make him a nightmare for some people. So he's going to go out and look for a job for that. How logically is he going about that? Well, logically, he's going to try and do this or that because I've got kind of the logic for the character. And so that's what I would recommend is kind of the step to creating that arc is figure out the logic of the character and kind of the history that they're at and figure out what arc you want to tell, because sometimes that can be even more important than the objective itself. Like, I want a tragic arc, I want a heroic arc, I want an insanity arc. And if you
All
have
three.
an arc that you're going for, you can start looking at the logic of the character, that arc, and be like, well, what could they be after that goes after that path? And the second part is I like to think of milestones along their arc. What are going to be big events that occur that I know are going to be big story moments, right? Uh, when the necromancer gets his offer to learn necromancy, when he resurrects his daughters, when he finds the secret ingredient that lets him do it. I think of these key points along that arc that I've outlined, and I don't define exactly what has to happen, just sort of a rough idea of what is this moment. And I do it also as a DM when I'm planning events for characters, as I'll think, what are some events that can happen along this trajectory, uh, and give them kind of a rough outline. They find this thing, they get a good job, they have a horrible setback. And then, as the chaos of the story unfolds, if something seems to start lining up with that, I will weave that event into it. Sorry, went on a bit a bit much there.
I would just like to add, for anybody who is like concerned about the implications of logic, for example, one thing I think is really important is, like, if the logic leads you to a place that is very, very dark, chat with your group about it. And like, this is, again, I speak from experience, right? I had a character who the logic of his situation led him to a point where, in discussions with the GM, I was like, yeah, I feel like now he'd probably be sort of passively suicidal, like a little bit, like, and that is a dark place to be in, and you want to make sure that everyone is comfortable where you think your character is going. And so like you'll know if it's a thing you have to talk about, I feel like, and if it is not a comfortable place, then that's the place for meta conversation with the DM and with everybody else to see, is there an event that could be immediately put in to draw them out if not everybody is comfortable with this place? Is there an alternate interpretation of the logic that makes sense so you feel like you're still being honest with the character? Because I do feel that, like, the trap that we can get in when we're being very method as such is that we're like, this is not even in the that's what my character would do sense. That tends to be more in like the group issue, like you make a bad decision, the group gets pissed off. Like, this is more about broader story arcs, like this is where my character would go. And if where they would go is going to be too much, like, then that's something to think about, just as a thing to put out there. Because we've been talking in fairly heavy terms. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents on that one.
No, absolutely. You should always talk to your group. I think that's definitely a very important part of the meta of the game, is making sure that the group's communicating, talking with the GM. You know, even during character creation, I think it's that meta communication of how do these people work together, kind of what are we looking at playing, how are these people going to interact, is all very much part of that important meta aspect to make sure that everyone is enjoying the story and the narrative and telling the story that everyone wants to have. But what are the rest of your thoughts on that? Evan, Kyle, James.
Did anyone else want to add anything? Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. Go.
No,
I think
no.
think
If you
you
were
guys
going to
covered
jump
it
in,
pretty
jump in.
good, yeah.
At the end of the day, I think what Nick said ties into a very good core part of D&D is establishing boundaries of what everyone's comfortable. And that's just a very good pre-session thing. In terms of character creation, exploring themes, stuff like that. And then also just being aware that sometimes those boundaries evolve and change as the game goes on. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think the last topic I'd like to touch on in the little bit of time we have left for tonight is finding ways, or how you know when a character is kind of taken on a life of their own. I know Nick has a bit to say on this, but if you've ever experienced it or had a moment, I as a DM have had moments where I almost go complete method acting in the GM, and just kind of the story and the NPCs start running away from me, and I'm not in control of what happens, and I'll sit there and come back at it later and be like, oh, wow, that session went way over here.
We've done that
Just
a couple
because of the
times
way
to
that
you.
the whole every interaction went. And I was like, oh man, from a gaming standpoint, I totally should have been doing this as a GM. And being like, okay, this is going to happen, and I'll lower their dice rolls, and I'm going to meta this, and I'll cheat a few things in there, and everyone's going to end up alive. And instead, it's like, oh man, that almost everyone died. Oh, that was brutal. Like, they drowned. Everyone drowned in the ocean.
That
Yeah,
would never
Uh,
happen.
It was hilarious.
That would never happen.
But curious,
We're all having
so
fun.
when is a yeah? Have you ever experienced the point, and how would you recommend getting there where a character almost comes alive?
Oh, most of my characters come alive just before they die.
So play
So
characters
good.
with better survival instincts.
Got it. Noted.
No, I mean, yes, I've been there a couple of times, and Frosty's world building is so good that you do find that you can get your character spontaneously reacting and doing things. And yeah, I had a character who was clearly naive a lot of the time, and it was sort of gradually getting him in more and more trouble. And it was playing well, and I lent into it, and eventually it led to his demise, like straight off a cliff of talking himself into trouble. And on one hand, I was sad to lose the character, but on the other hand, I felt I was kind of finally understood them, and like it was kind of went out in a kind of glorious way, and I enjoyed it immensely. like, yeah, I found him and it made sense, and that was and yeah, I kind of lost control of him, and
What
it's
helped you reach that point where the character just kind of was on their own, almost off the rails from your control?
um. I mean, this was, we had this question around losing sanity, and and again, this is the cyberpunk world where drugs becomes an issue, and working out how to play into that. Um, and I talked about that kind of the character would speak in a non-linear way, and that was a little bit forced at first, but as time went on, I almost sort of fell into that character, and as soon as I fell into that, he could talk himself into enormous amounts of trouble very quickly. Um, and yeah, I think it was the more I got to fall into that speech pattern, the easier it was to be the character, and the easier it was to lose control of them.
So finding the character's voice, having the meta immersion that we talked about with
Hmm.
kind of like finding a way that
Yeah.
you could be in this weird place but still be playing the game actively and the
Yeah.
world itself. All right. Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, so I haven't really been doing it for too long, but so there's only been a couple times where I've been so into a character or like an NPC where it just kind of takes a mind of its own. And the first time that's ever happened was with Nick's campaign. I was playing
The tunnel.
I was playing cart
So
and
stupid.
just
So
kind of
funny.
going back to parts of ourselves we put in our characters, like a strive and a will for success no matter the cost. Um, yeah, there's a point in Nick's campaign where we go underground in this cottage of people who may or may not have been into some TV things, and there was this long, like dark, pitch black corridor, and start walking through, and this voice of like I'm like, my process
is coming into our home now. We shall taste them and play. Yes, we will.
and sitting here, and the character wants to be able to talk and figure out what's at the end of this corridor because it's relative to who he is and what he wants to succeed, and he keeps going and he starts taking damage and stuff like that. It very nearly dies going through this corridor instead of backing out. Makes it through at the end of it, and then he ends up meeting these followers of this cult who are similar to what he believes, but they're like anti him. So he tries to bargain with them, and almost dies for it. Yeah, that was another.
It was so funny.
It seems like when characters run away from you, it can be very easy to get them killed. Like characters that go off the rails and do stuff just have a knack for getting themselves in trouble. Like, no, I need to put you on a leash. Get back over here. Stay in the safe zone. But what about you, Evan?
So, I've had one of the first instances of my character running away from me last Saturday. And a lot happened when I let my character off the leash for 3 hours. He got married.
Oh god, run free with the Dobermans and the Golden Retrievers.
Yeah, literally got married in one session and is now picking a fight with a giant. So, we're having a great time. It's probably I think either first or second time I've actually lost control of the character. For the most part, I've kept it in check of how I wanted the character to go, and then I don't know what happened. It just ran away. I had my eye on it, and now I look back and it's gone. So it can be a shock for sure, but it was fun just to roll with it. I'm like, oh, I've dug this hole. How deep can we dig it? Let's see how far it goes.
Well, and what do you feel created the situation that caused the character to run away and kind of take on a life its own? Like, what do you feel created that?
A lot of it was character motivations kind of suddenly changing really quickly, and that kind of just having his like entire world flipped on its head. Even just for that split second was a shock to not just my character, but to me even. And that really kind of helped me almost break the mold of the character and go off in a new direction.
So sort of like, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, not
Mm.
trying to put words in your mouth, but
Yeah,
so like a situation where, like the fact that you couldn't process the situation
yeah,
meant the character had to just kind of take over. It
yeah.
sounds
I
like.
had to kind of think as my character that moment, just oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, what next? This makes sense. Let's go with this. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll worry about it later. We gotta get to this part now.
And then Kyle, what about for you in that tunnel instance? What for you created that? Do you feel created that moment where the character kind of ran away from you and took on a life of their own?
Yeah, so this idea of just doing whatever it takes for success, for knowledge, that's like one of the driving, characteristics of the character is this journey for knowledge in terms of just the universe and just understanding how everything works, and that was a pathway to it. So he had to go through this to experience that, learn that, and that's kind of where it ran away. Is just because it was just this huge disregard for personal safety, and I was like, full send.
All right. And then Nick, I know you're gonna have a lot to say on this one.
Only because of my recent experience in your game. So I will say, I feel like my character, the original Hadrian, ran away from me. Probably the session when
No spoilers.
no, but when he met a goddess and told her to fuck off. Um, because I, as a player, was like, yes, this is the moment when I can take my subclass and get all the stuff. And I was like, but at the same time, she's telling me what I'm supposed to do. I'm not a fan of her approach. She's very aggressive. I did not consent to this. Get off of me. Thank you very much. And like from then on, I was like, yeah, like I've never felt completely in control of the character. I think there's a couple of things that contributed to that. One is again that like I think part of it comes back to the creation of the character, right? I knew what parts of myself I put into it, and so when those are magnified enough, they just like they override my player brain and they become like a thing in and of themselves. But also it's just a question of like when you like this is sort of the culmination, putting everything we talked about together. When you find that personality, when you put yourself into it, when you find that voice and you've played with that voice, when you've let the story of the world impact the character and you've grown with that story, like at a certain point, to me at least, it almost becomes like a muscle memory. Like it's reflexive the way that I've reacted to situations in this particular character's mind. It's to the point where afterwards Frosty will be like, yeah, you were a real dick to that person. I was? What? I thought I was extremely polite. Like that kind of thing. And it's like that's legit. Like I don't necessarily remember being insulting or being until like I process it afterwards. Again, I think part of that is like the amount of yourself you put into the character, but part of it's also just recognizing, I think, how your character is interacting with the world and how the world is responding to your character and just running with it.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I think that the time when I most lost control of the character was in a certain party, a certain very what's it a very merry party that
I think they drink tea there.
yeah, maybe there may have been hats, but just like I think at that if there was an apex of control loss. It was where I made a decision and I legitimately still couldn't tell you whether it was me as a player fucking up or the character fucking up. And like that was intense, but also I think, yeah, kind of it again, the phrase used before, one of those quintessential roleplay moments where like that line kind of blurs a lot. Which again, we talked about this bit, but it can be a scary thing. But I found it to be immensely satisfying. Yeah.
I liked your phrasing of reacting reflexively. I think that's what. Yeah, when there isn't a thought going into the response, or the action, it just happens.
Oh yeah, it just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you get maybe it's like a slight sinking feeling seconds afterwards.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think Frosty can attest to this, but I did something and I was like, oh my, like out of character. I was like, oh my god, what did I do? What did I do?
Yeah. In that moment, you did it, and then immediately afterward, before anything got said, you were like, what did I do?
Fuck, what did I do?
What did I do?
All right. I think that's most of the topics we had planned to get covered. Before we go, is there anything any of you would like to bring up about getting into character, developing a character, or anything like that? Or anything you would like to pose to any of the others? And then we'll give a little bit of a closing.
I'm curious, what are your guys' like pre-session kind of prep for getting into character? What do you guys do? Because like I have certain things I do, but like I'm curious what people do.
So for me, I'll start this one, and then I'll pass it on to the next person. Then that person has to decide who answers them. Yes. I will usually pace back and forth in my living room, practicing ideas I have for dialogue that certain characters are going to, I think, give during that particular session. I'll look at pictures of the character, and I'll even act out little scenes in my living room between me and other player characters, giving my own impersonation of that character as like a little mini theater. My roommate laughs her ass off, I'm sure. She brags about it. She's like, "Oh my god, it's amazing that what what Frosty does." I just hear her going at it, all morning or all day while she's working, trying to do all this stuff. But that's my getting into routine. And music. I listen to the music of the mood that I want for the session.
Okay.
And I will pass it to James.
James, who does not yet have a routine for getting into character, and part of coming to this session was to try and to pick up tips. I think I'm like a little weirdly self-conscious to like do that kind of warm up. I wish, I should try it. I will try it. I would say there was a comment Nick made earlier about chatting between the players outside of session, and that's something I would love to be able to do, to just be my character, not necessarily part of a session, but to just chat and get to know the other characters, like more than in just the game session, and maybe that'll help build something up beforehand. But yeah, no, I will listen to what everyone else says and try taking these on before we start. Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, just like you, I don't actually have a character warm up. For me, I make a cup of coffee, I grab my bird, and then I'll just do like a couple of key phrases in a character voice, and that's about it.
Nice.
Yeah. Evan.
Oh, so my pre-session will be usually look back through notes of recent sessions and just kind of get in that mind space of where my character's at currently, and then make sure the voice down, and then kind of play out maybe put some potential scenarios in my head of what I think could happen this session, which never usually turns out the way I think it's going to happen.
Never turns out the way you think.
Never does. And yeah, just kind of get in the character's mindset again. Because like it's easy to do once I'm in session, but kind of out of session, it's harder for me to get into the mindset. Once I get going, it's a lot it's easy to stay in the mindset, but kind of just again looking back through notes and going over what happened last session or session before that is really a big help. Nick.
So I listen to music. I will compose playlists for a particular character that reflects what I think is their mood set. I do the thing of like running over my previous notes. I will often go through them before session and put them into more of the character's voice, which for Hadrian can be anything from making them more abrasive and like what the fuck was going on here to like putting them in Shakespearean. And usually both. I will play out some scenarios in my head, which again never go the way I want them to, or I as a player want them to, because the character has different ideas and focuses on different things. Yeah, I do like with the particular voice I use for Hadrian. I'm now comfortable enough in it that I can just kind of flip in and out pretty fast. But before then, I would like walk around practicing that and getting the posture and like putting my shoulders back so that I wouldn't destroy my throat. But with respect to what James said, I will say one thing I've, as a DM, have often done, and I'm very down to do it for this game, is just sort of had like random quote unquote tavern talk sessions where everybody just kind of comes in as their character. Like, it doesn't have to be even like an in-world conversation. You can just be like, I've had people just chat about like American politics, but as their character. And it's very good for like getting into the voice. Like Evan can attest to this. We've had conversations about like what happened in a session outside, completely outside of our game, as like
in character,
Garth and Hadrian, right? It's like, oh yeah, that was a shitty fucking decision you made. What the fuck were you thinking?
Oh,
like,
with the pressure gone of the game itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just like you're just shooting the shit, but as the character, and like that, I think it really helps everybody else to get like your character's rhythm in their mind, so that like, for example, people aren't shocked anymore in the games when Hadrian says something insulting, because he does it all the time, and they're not shocked when Garth
What's funny is when I jump in as the villains during those conversations.
Yeah, that's not fun.
And then everyone's like, oh shit.
Everyone's like, no, Jill, go away.
Jill, leave me alone. Please.
If you jumped in as Godric, I would totally Shakespeare, but that's harder to jump in for. Yeah, but like, so like that kind of thing for me at least is, it's really, that's not a character prep things for like pre-session, more as like a group prep for being like a group and talking together. And like, if you guys want to do that for the stream, I think it would be a delightful thing to occasionally just like have like an hour long, like everybody in character, like shooting the shit.
Well, if anything, I'd kind of like to have that be one of our little geeking out things that we can do, is just
that'd be
all of us sitting down
just
chatting. But and even just discussions where if we get an audience, when we get an audience, I'm going to say when we get an audience, because we're going to get one. Positive thinking.
I think we will.
That
we didn't advertise
even giving
this
them the
session
chance
very well.
to talk to you guys as your characters and ask questions about how your characters felt about stuff. I think would be really interesting.
Oh, that would be hilarious.
That'd be fun. Yeah, that'd be fun.
But Kyle,
how was the hot tub?
The hot tub
any
sucked.
last questions or thoughts that you want to share or ask to the group? All right. Nick?
No, I'm just saying this is my kitty.
Well, anything that you want to pose or ask to the group before we depart?
No, I think we've had a good
All right.
conversation.
James, any last
Yep,
questions
same.
or thoughts?
No,
All
this has
right.
been good.
Just figured I'd check. All right. So once again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching us. If you enjoyed us, please like and subscribe on YouTube or follow us on Twitch. I would also like to personally thank Kyle, Nick, James, Kovac, Evan, and David for being a part of the stream with me, as well as all of our viewers. Thank you. And thank you to all of the artists that contributed to making this stream possible. Everyone that's contributed, it is much appreciated. Thank you for making this stream come true. We've got a great group, and excited to see you this Thursday for session 1 of Indara the Second Age, and we will see you then.
Fucking hyped. Sorry.